The delivery. The cargo ship drifted silently into Jax's lonely outpost, its engines humming faintly in the icy darkness of space. Jax stood at the edge of the docking bay, arms crossed, eyes scanning the blinking lights of the vessel as it came to a halt. This wasn't an unusual sight for him. He was used to deliveries from strange corners of the galaxy. His business thrived on rare goods, exotic items, and, occasionally, things no one wanted to ask too many questions about. The ship's cargo hold opened with a hiss, releasing a gust of cold air that made Jax shiver. A hovering crate slid out, sleek and metallic, marked with bold red letters. Fresh meat. Handle with care. Jax raised an eyebrow. Fresh meat. That wasn't on the manifest. He had ordered components for his ship repairs, and maybe a few bottles of Orion rum for himself. This crate didn't fit the bill. He scratched his beard and stepped closer. His boots echoed against the metallic floor as he approached, his instincts warning him to be cautious. With a grunt, he keyed in the access code on the crate's side panel. A soft beep confirmed the unlock, and the lid slid open with a quiet hiss. The cold mist inside spilled out, curling around his feet like ghostly tendrils. Jax leaned forward, expecting to see frozen slabs of some alien beast. Instead, he froze. Inside the crate lay a young girl, her skin faintly glowing with a soft bluish hue. Her face was serene, as if she were simply asleep. Her hair, silvery and light, seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the docking bay. She wore a strange suit made of a material Jax couldn't identify, its surface etched with glowing symbols. What the hell? Jax muttered under his breath, his heart thudding in his chest. As he leaned closer, the girl's eyes snapped open. They glowed like two bright stars, piercing through the shadows of the bay. Jax stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The girl gasped, her chest rising sharply as she drew in her first breath. She blinked rapidly, her gaze darting around the room before settling on him. "Where am I?" Her voice was soft, but carried a weight that made Jax's skin prickle. "Who are you?" Jax asked, his hand instinctively moving to the blaster holstered at his side. His voice came out harsher than he intended, but he was too stunned to care. The girl sat up slowly, her movements shaky but deliberate. They sent me here. You have to help me. Please." Her glowing eyes locked onto his, filled with a mixture of fear and urgency. "Sent you? Who sent you? And why the hell are you in a crate marked fresh meat?" Jax's voice was tinged with disbelief. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or worse, a trap. The girl's expression darkened. "They're coming. They won't stop until they have me." Before Jax could respond, the outpost's security system blared to life, red lights flashing across the bay. A robotic voice echoed through the facility. "Unidentified vessel approaching. Possible hostile intent." Jax's stomach dropped. He rushed to the control panel on the wall and scanned the incoming data. A small but heavily armed ship was heading straight for the outpost, its weapon systems already primed. "Great," Jax muttered, slamming his fist against the panel. "This day just keeps getting better." The girl stepped out of the crate, her legs wobbling slightly. "You have to leave now," she said, her voice stronger this time. The glowing symbols on her suit pulsed faintly, casting an eerie light around her. "Hold on," Jax said, turning to face her. "I don't know who you are or what mess you've brought to my doorstep, but I'm not about to." The docking bay doors shuddered as something slammed against them from the outside. Jax felt the vibrations through the floor. He cursed under his breath and grabbed the girl's arm. "Fine. Let's go," he said, dragging her toward his ship. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but he wasn't about to stick around and find out who or what was trying to break in. As they boarded his ship, the girl paused, looking back at the crate. "Wait," she said. She reached into the crate and pulled out a small glowing device, a disc-like object that fit perfectly into her palm. "What is that?" Jax asked, his patience wearing thin. "It's our only chance," she replied cryptically, tucking the device into a hidden pocket of her suit. The ship's engines roared to life as Jax powered it up. The docking bay doors finally gave way, and a group of armored figures stormed in, weapons drawn. Jax didn't wait to see what they wanted. He punched the thrusters, and the ship shot out of the bay, narrowly avoiding a hail of laser fire. As they broke free into the cold expanse of space, Jax stole a glance at the girl. She sat quietly in the co-pilot's seat, her glowing eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "Start talking," Jax said, his voice edged with frustration. "Who are you, and why are people trying to kill me now?" The girl turned to him, her expression solemn. "My name is Ilara," she said, "and if they catch me, it won't just be me who dies. It'll be everyone." Jax stared at her, his mind racing. He had a feeling this was the beginning of something far bigger than himself, and far more dangerous. Secrets in the stars. Jax's ship hurtled through the void, the stars streaking past like silver lines in the dark. The engines groaned under the strain, warning him that he was pushing them too hard. He gripped the controls, jaw tight, sweat beading on his brow. Behind him, Ilara sat silently in the co-pilot's seat, her glowing eyes fixed on the ship's dashboard. She hadn't spoken much since they'd escaped the outpost, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Jax finally exhaled, easing back on the thrusters. The ship slowed to a steadier pace, and he flipped a few switches to stabilize the system. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was silence, save for the hum of the engines. "All right," he said, swiveling his chair to face her. "Now that we're not about to get blasted into space dust, you owe me some answers. Who are you, and what the hell have you dragged me into?" Ilara looked at him, her expression unreadable. The glowing symbols on her suit pulsed faintly, as if responding to her heartbeat. "I didn't drag you into anything," she said quietly. "You opened the crate. You chose this." Jax let out a sharp laugh, his frustration bubbling over. "Yeah, because I thought I was getting a delivery of fancy alien steaks, not whatever this is." He gestured toward her, his voice rising. "So don't give me that you chose this nonsense." Ilara's gaze didn't waver. "If I told you everything, you wouldn't believe me." "Try me," Jax shot back. "I've seen some weird stuff in my time. But this takes the prize." She hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice low. "My name is Ilara. I wasn't born in this galaxy. I was created." "Created," Jax repeated, narrowing his eyes. "Like a clone or something?" "Not exactly," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I'm a prototype. My creators, an advanced alien civilization, designed me to carry the genetic blueprint for evolution itself. They believed I could be the key to bridging the gap between species, uniting them. But something went wrong. They vanished before they could finish what they started." Jax blinked, trying to process her words. "So you're some kind of science experiment?" Ilara's expression darkened. "To some, yes. That's why Xerath Corp wants me. They don't care about unity or evolution. They want to dissect me, use my DNA to create weapons, soldiers, or worse." Jax leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "And you ended up in a crate marked fresh meat because they were transporting me to one of their labs," she explained. "I managed to disrupt the ship's systems and rerouted myself to your outpost. It was the only place nearby where I thought I might have a chance to escape." Jax shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. "This is insane. Do you realize what you've done? Xerath Corp doesn't just let things go. They'll hunt us to the edge of the galaxy for this." "I know," Ilara said simply. "That's why I need your help." Jax laughed again, but this time it was hollow. "Help you? Lady, I'm a traitor, not a hero. I don't even know why I didn't just leave you in that crate." Ilara's glowing eyes softened, and for the first time, Jax saw something human in her, a flicker of vulnerability. "Because you know it's the right thing to do," she said quietly. "And because if Zareth gets their hands on me, they won't stop with just me. They'll come after anyone who knows about me, including you." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've got a real way of making a guy feel trapped, you know that." Before she could respond, the ship's console lit up with a warning. A shrill alarm echoed through the cockpit, and Jax's heart sank as he read the incoming signal. "They've found us," he muttered. On the display screen, a Zareth Corp patrol ship loomed into view, its sleek black frame bristling with weapons. A mechanical voice crackled through the comms system. "Unidentified vessel. This is Zareth Corporation. Surrender the stolen cargo immediately, or prepare to be destroyed." "Stolen cargo?" Jack scoffed, his hands flying across the controls. "You've got to be kidding me." Ilara's glowing markings flared brighter. "We can't outrun them," she said. "But I can help." "How?" Jax demanded. "You're not exactly packing a blaster." "I don't need one," she said, her voice steady. She placed her hands on the dashboard, and the ship's systems flickered. The lights dimmed for a moment before surging back to life, brighter and sharper than before. "What are you doing?" Jax asked, alarmed. "Trust me," Ilara said. The symbols on her suit glowed intensely now, casting strange patterns across the walls. "I can disrupt their systems, but I'll need you to keep the ship steady." Jax hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Fine. Do whatever you have to." The patrol ship fired a warning shot, narrowly missing them. Jax gritted his teeth and pushed the engines to their limit, weaving through the asteroid field ahead. Behind him, Ilara closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she focused her energy. The patrol ship suddenly veered off course, its weapon systems sparking and malfunctioning. Jax stared in disbelief as the massive vessel spiraled away, its engines sputtering. "What the hell did you do?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and fear. "I disrupted their neural link," Ilara said, her voice weak. She slumped back in her seat, her glowing markings fading. "But it won't last. More will come." Jax stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just some runaway experiment. She was something far more dangerous and far more valuable. And now, he was stuck with her. "Great," he muttered. "Just great." As the ship disappeared into the safety of the asteroid field, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of their trouble, a deadly chase. The asteroid field stretched out before them, a chaotic maze of tumbling rocks illuminated by the faint glow of distant stars. Jax gripped the ship's controls, his eyes darting between the swirling debris and the flashing red lights on the console. The warning alarms screamed in his ears, but he couldn't afford to turn them off. Every alert was a reminder of just how close the Zareth Corp patrol ships were. "Hold on," Jax shouted, twisting the ship into a sharp dive as a chunk of asteroid the size of a small moon loomed ahead. The ship shuddered violently, its thrusters sputtering under the strain. Behind him, Ilara clung to the co-pilot's seat, her face pale, but her glowing eyes sharp. "They're gaining on us," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "You can't outrun them forever." "I know that," Jax snapped, wrestling the controls as the ship narrowly dodged another asteroid. The Zareth ships were closing in, their sleek black forms slicing through the field with unnerving precision. He could see them on the scanner, 3 of them, each bristling with weapons that could turn his rusty freighter into scrap in seconds. "We need a plan," Jax said, his voice tight. "And fast." Ilara's markings began to glow faintly, the light pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. "I can disrupt their systems again, but it'll only work if we're close enough." Jax glanced at her, incredulous. "Close enough? Are you crazy? If they get any closer, we're toast." "You don't have a choice," Ilara replied, her tone steady. "If we stay in this asteroid field, they'll pick us off piece by piece. But if I can disable their lead ship, we might have a chance." Jax cursed under his breath. She wasn't wrong. but the idea of deliberately getting closer to the enemy felt like suicide. Still, he couldn't deny that his options were running out. "Fine," he said, slamming his hand on the throttle. "But if this doesn't work, I'm blaming you." The ship lurched forward, engines roaring as Jax pushed them to their limits. The Zereth patrol ships immediately adjusted their course, closing the gap between them. The lead ship fired a warning shot, a streak of red energy that skimmed dangerously close to Jax's hull. "Whatever you're going to do it now," Jax shouted. Ilara unbuckled herself from the seat and stepped toward the central console. Her glowing markings flared brighter, casting an eerie light across the cockpit. She placed her hands on the console, and Jax watched as the ship's systems flickered, the lights dimming before surging back to life. "Just keep us steady," Ilara said, her voice strained. "And don't let them hit us." "Easier said than done," Jax muttered, pulling the ship into a sharp roll as another barrage of laser fire streaked past. His hands flew over the controls, dodging asteroids and enemy fire with a mix of skill and sheer desperation. Ilara's breathing grew heavier as the light from her markings intensified. The console beneath her hands began to hum, the sound growing louder as her energy seemed to pour into the ship's systems. Jax could feel it, a strange, almost electric charge that made the hair on his arms stand on end. The lead Zereth ship suddenly veered off course, its engine sputtering. Sparks flew from its hull as its weapon systems flickered and died. The two other ships hesitated, breaking formation as their lead faltered. "It's working," Jax shouted, a hint of relief in his voice. Ilara didn't respond. Her entire body was trembling now, her glowing markings pulsing erratically. Jax's relief quickly turned to concern as he glanced back at her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. "I just need a little more time," Ilara said through gritted teeth. Her eyes were closed, her focus entirely on the task at hand. The Zereth ships were faltering, their movements becoming sluggish as Ilara's energy disrupted their systems. But Jax's ship wasn't faring much better. Warning lights flashed across the console, and the engines groaned under the strain. Whatever Ilara was doing, it was pushing the ship to its limits. "Hang on," Jax said, pulling the ship into a steep dive. The maneuver sent them spiraling toward a massive asteroid, its jagged surface glowing faintly in the starlight. For a moment, it seemed as though they would crash, but at the last second, Jax leveled out, skimming just above the rocky surface. The Zereth ships followed, their movements erratic but still dangerous. One of them clipped the edge of the asteroid, its hull crumpling as it spun out of control. The remaining ship fired a desperate volley of shots, but its aim was wild, the lasers harmlessly striking the asteroid field. "I can't hold them much longer," Ilara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her glowing markings were dimming, the light fading as her strength waned. "You've done enough," Jax said, his voice softer now. "Just hang on. I'll take it from here." With a final burst of speed, Jax guided the ship through a narrow crevice in the asteroid. The Zereth ship attempted to follow, but its larger frame couldn't squeeze through the gap. There was a deafening crash as it collided with the asteroid, breaking apart in a fiery explosion. Jax let out a shaky breath as the warning alarms finally fell silent. He guided the ship out of the asteroid field, the open expanse of space stretching out before them. "We made it," he said, glancing back at Ilara, but she didn't respond. She had collapsed against the console, her glowing markings now completely dark. "Hey," Jax said, rushing to her side. He gently shook her, his panic rising. "Ilara, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a weak smile. "Told you it would work," she murmured before slipping into unconsciousness. Jax stared at her for a moment, his mind racing. He didn't know what kind of trouble he'd signed up for, but one thing was certain: he couldn't abandon her now. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. "Hang in there, kid," Jax said softly, guiding the ship toward the nearest safe haven. "We're not done yet." The alien gift. The vast, star-speckled void of space stretched endlessly around Jax's ship as it drifted through relative silence. The adrenaline from their escape had begun to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable stillness that pressed on Jax's nerves. His hands moved automatically across the controls, steadying the ship's systems and ensuring they were off Zereth Corp's radar for the moment. Ilara lay unconscious in the co-pilot's seat, her faintly glowing markings now reduced to barely visible lines across her skin. Jax stole a glance at her, his thoughts racing. She looked fragile now, nothing like the powerful being who had single-handedly disabled an entire fleet of Zereth ships. He didn't know much about her or what she truly was, but one thing was clear: she was more than just cargo. "Who are you really, kid?" Jax muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. A soft groan pulled him from his thoughts. Ilara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked disoriented, her gaze unfocused. Then, as her surroundings came into view, she sat up with a sharp inhale. "You're safe," Jax said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "For now, anyway." Ilara blinked, her glowing eyes fixing on him. "You didn't leave me," she said, her voice laced with quiet surprise. "Yeah, well, you don't exactly strike me as someone who'd stay quiet in a crate if I dumped you out an airlock," Jax replied, trying to mask his concern with sarcasm. "Besides, you owe me a new thruster system after that stunt you pulled." Ilara managed a faint smile, but it quickly faded. "They'll keep coming," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with exhaustion. "Zereth won't stop until they have me." Jax leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Then maybe it's time you told me what you're really capable of. You took down 3 ships with... what? Your glowing light show. Care to explain that?" Ilara hesitated, her glowing markings flickering faintly. "It's hard to explain. My creators gave me the ability to interface with technology on a molecular level. I can manipulate energy fields, disrupt systems, even enhance certain mechanics. It's not something I control easily. It takes a toll." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I noticed. You passed out cold for an hour." She nodded, her expression serious. "It's dangerous for me to use it too much. My body wasn't designed to handle this power for long periods." Jax rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of her words. "So let me get this straight. You're some kind of living key, a walking, talking tool that can manipulate any tech you touch." Ilara's gaze dropped to the floor. "To Zereth, that's all I am. A tool, a weapon. But my creators had a different purpose in mind. They believed I could bring balance, help bridge the gap between species, create harmony where there's division." Jax scoffed, the corner of his mouth twitching into a bitter smile. "Harmony? Lady, you've been in the galaxy long enough to know that's a pipe dream. Most people don't want balance, they want control." "Maybe," Ilara said softly, "but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying." Jax studied her for a moment, his skepticism warring with something he couldn't quite name. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. There was a quiet determination in her, a strength that belied her fragile appearance. He didn't know if he believed in her grand vision, but he couldn't deny the power she carried. Before he could respond, the ship's console beeped, drawing his attention. A holographic map flickered to life, displaying the surrounding star systems. A single blip flashed red, a warning of a nearby signal. "What is it?" Ilara asked, her voice tense. "Signal's faint," Jax said, frowning as he adjusted the controls. "Could be a distress beacon, or a trap." Ilara leaned closer to the console, her glowing eyes scanning the display. "It's not Zereth. Their signals are more aggressive. This one feels old." Jax shot her a skeptical look. "Feels old? What does that even mean?" "I can sense the energy signature," she explained, her markings pulsing faintly. "It's ancient, but not hostile." Jax sighed, debating whether to investigate. He knew better than to chase strange signals in deep space, It rarely ended well, but something in Ilara's tone gave him pause. She seemed drawn to it. "Fine," he said reluctantly, setting a course for the signal. "But if this turns out to be a trap, I'm blaming you." As the ship approached the source of the signal, a massive structure came into view, a derelict station drifting aimlessly in the void. Its surface was scarred and rusted, a relic of a time long forgotten. "What is that?" Jax muttered, his eyes narrowing. Ilara's markings flared brighter, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "It's a precursor station. My creators built these, long before your species even existed." Jax's hands froze on the controls. "Wait, you're telling me this place is tied to you?" Ilara nodded, her expression solemn. "If we're lucky, there might be something here we can use. Answers. Tools to fight Zereth. Or maybe," she hesitated, her voice dropping, "maybe a way to stop me from being their target." Jax stared at the station, unease settling in his gut. He didn't like the idea of venturing into an ancient alien ruin with a glowing girl who could short-circuit ships, but he couldn't deny the pull of curiosity. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what your ancestors left behind." As the ship docked with the station, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger than either of them. Whatever secrets the station held, he knew one thing for sure. They were about to change everything. The hidden outpost. Jax's ship emerged from hyperspace with a lurch, the engines groaning in protest as they adjusted to real space. Before them stretched the desolate expanse of a red-tinged nebula, its swirling gases obscuring the stars beyond. Hidden deep within the nebula, surrounded by natural interference that scrambled most scanners, was their destination. Outpost Varnak. The outpost wasn't on any official maps. It wasn't the kind of place you advertised. It was a haven for rebels, mercenaries, and outcasts who had no love for the galactic corporations that controlled the galaxy. Jax had been here before, years ago, when he'd run a few smuggling jobs for the rebels. He hadn't been back since, and he wasn't sure if he'd be welcome now. "Is this place safe?" Ilara asked, her voice quiet but steady. She stood behind Jax, her glowing markings dim but still visible. Harlan sighed heavily. "You're asking for a lot, Jax. But if what she says is true, we can't afford to ignore it." He tapped a few buttons on the console, bringing up a schematic of Zereth's main research facility. "There's one place where we might find the answers you're looking for. It's a long shot, but if you're willing to risk it, we might just have a chance to take Zereth down." Jax and Ilara exchanged a glance, determination etched on both their faces. "We're in," Jax said. Harlan nodded. "Then let's get to work. Time's not on our side." Betrayal and revelation. The briefing room was silent, the glow of the holographic map casting eerie blue shadows on the walls. Jax, Ilara, and Harlan stood around the central table, studying the schematic of Zereth Corp's primary research facility, a massive structure orbiting a dead star. Its outer shell bristled with weapons, and its interior was a labyrinth of security systems designed to repel intruders. Jax leaned over the map, rubbing his temples. "This place is a fortress. How the hell are we supposed to get in?" Harlan crossed his arms, his cybernetic hand tapping against his elbow. "It's not impossible. They've got weak points, supply routes, blind spots in their patrols. But you'll need more than luck to pull this off." Ilara, standing quietly to the side, traced a glowing finger along the map. "The energy core," she said, her voice steady. "If we can access it, I can disable the entire station. Their systems are built on an ancient architecture. I can interface with it." Harlan raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about that?" Ilara nodded. "I'm the only one who can." Jax sighed, his skepticism evident. "And what happens if you burn yourself out again? What's our backup plan?" "There is no backup," Ilara replied, meeting his gaze. "If I fail, we all fail." Before Jax could argue, the door to the room slid open with a hiss. A young rebel burst in, panting and wide-eyed. "Harlan, we've got a problem." There's a Zereth patrol ship in the nebula. It's scanning for us. Harlan's jaw tightened. How the hell did they find us so fast? The rebel hesitated, his gaze flicking to Jax and Ilara. We think someone tipped them off. Jax stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to his blaster. A traitor. Harlan's expression darkened. Seems like it. The tension in the room was palpable. Jax scanned the faces around him, his instincts on high alert. You've got spies in your ranks. It wouldn't be the first time, Harlan said grimly. He turned to the rebel. Double the patrols and lock down the outpost. No one gets in or out without my say-so. As the rebel rushed off, Jax turned to Ilara. You think this is a coincidence? Ilara shook her head, her glowing markings dimming slightly. No. Zereth is too precise. They knew exactly where to look. Harlan slammed his fist on the table. Whoever sold us out, they'd just put everyone here at risk. The attack. The outpost's alarms blared, cutting through the tense silence. Jax's heart sank as he felt the vibrations of incoming fire. Zereth's ships were here. The walls shuddered as explosions echoed through the station. Everyone to battle stations. Harlan barked, grabbing his rifle. He turned to Jax and Ilara. You two, get to the docking bay. If this place falls, you need to get out of here. What about you? Jax asked. I'll hold them off as long as I can, Harlan said. Just make sure she doesn't fall into their hands. Ilara hesitated, her glowing eyes flicking between Jax and Harlan. I can help. No, Jax interrupted, grabbing her arm. We're leaving. Now. The station was chaos as they sprinted toward the docking bay. Rebels and mercenaries rushed past them, weapons in hand, as explosions rocked the corridors. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. When they reached the docking bay, Jax stopped in his tracks. Zereth mercenaries were already there, their black armor gleaming under the flickering lights. They moved with precision, securing the area and cutting off any escape routes. Jax pulled Ilara behind a stack of crates, his mind racing. We're trapped, he muttered, peeking around the corner. Ilara's markings flared slightly, her expression calm despite the danger. I can disable their comms. It'll give us a window to get to the ship. Are you sure you've got enough juice for that? Jax asked. I'll manage, Ilara said, placing her hands on the crate. Her markings pulsed brightly, and the mercenaries' communication devices crackled with static. Confusion spread through their ranks as they scrambled to fix their systems. Now, Jax hissed, pulling her toward the ship. They sprinted across the bay, dodging stray blaster fire. Jax fired a few shots of his own, taking down 2 mercenaries who blocked their path. They reached the ship and scrambled aboard, Jax slamming his fist on the controls to power it up. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the ground just as a wave of mercenaries stormed into the bay. Hold on, Jax shouted, yanking the controls. The ship blasted out of the docking bay, narrowly avoiding a hail of laser fire. As they soared into the nebula, Ilara slumped in her seat, her glowing markings dimming once more. Revelation. Once they were clear of the outpost, Jax activated the autopilot and turned to Ilara. We can't keep running like this. We need a plan. Ilara nodded weakly, her gaze distant. There's something I haven't told you, she said softly. Jax's eyes narrowed. What now? She hesitated, her glowing eyes locking onto his. I wasn't just created to unite species. I was designed to evolve. Constantly. Every time I use my abilities, I become stronger. But it's a double-edged sword. The more power I gain, the less control I have over it. Jax stared at her, his mind racing. Are you saying you're dangerous? I'm saying I don't know how much longer I can control it, Ilara admitted. If Zereth gets me, they'll exploit that. They'll turn me into a weapon of mass destruction. Jax ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. You're full of surprises, you know that. Ilara smiled faintly. I wish I wasn't. Before Jax could respond, the console beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. He frowned, pressing a button to bring it up. A holographic image flickered to life. It was Harlan, bloodied but alive. "Jax," Harlan said, his voice strained. "You've got bigger problems. The traitor, it wasn't one of my men. It was one of yours." Jax's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Harlan's gaze hardened. "Someone on that ship with you sent Zareth your location. Watch your back." The transmission cut out, leaving Jax and Ilara in stunned silence. Jax gripped the console, his knuckles white. "Looks like we've got more than Zareth to worry about," he said, his voice low. Ilara's glowing eyes narrowed. "Whoever it is, they won't get away with it." Jax nodded, his determination solidifying. "Dan right, they won't. But first, we've got to figure out our next move. Because this isn't over, not by a long shot." The final stand. The ship glided through the shadows of a dead star's orbit, cloaked in the natural interference of the surrounding debris. Jax sat in the pilot's seat, tension radiating off him as his fingers hovered over the controls. Ilara stood behind him, her glowing eyes fixed on the massive structure ahead. Zareth Corp's research facility, its sharp, angular design bristling with weaponry and shield generators. It looked more like a fortress than a lab. "This is it," Jax muttered, his voice heavy. "Once we're in, there's no turning back." Ilara nodded, her glowing markings pulsing faintly. "I know. We have to stop them here, or they'll hunt us forever." Jax glanced at her over his shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this? If what you said before is true, you're walking into the lion's den." "I don't have a choice," Ilara replied firmly. "Neither do you." The ship's console beeped, and a distorted voice crackled through the comms. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Jax smirked grimly. "Guess they're rolling out the welcome mat." Ilara stepped closer to the console, her hands hovering over the controls. "Let me handle this." Her markings flared brightly as she interfaced with the ship's systems. The warning lights on the console flickered, and the ship's signal scrambled, disappearing from the facility sensors. "They won't see us coming," Ilara said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But it won't last long. We need to move quickly." Jax tightened his grip on the controls. "Then let's do this." Infiltration. The ship slipped past the facility's outer defenses, weaving through the debris field. Jax maneuvered it into a hidden docking bay on the station's underbelly, using old smuggler tricks to avoid detection. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic clang, and the ship settled into place. Jax grabbed his blaster and turned to Ilara. "Remember the plan. We get to the energy core, you disable the station, and we get out. No heroics." Ilara met his gaze, her glowing eyes resolute. "Understood." As they descended the ramp, the station's cold, sterile air greeted them. The dimly lit corridors stretched ahead, eerily silent. Jax led the way, his blaster raised, while Ilara followed closely, her glowing markings providing the only light. The sound of approaching footsteps froze them in their tracks. Jax pressed himself against the wall, motioning for Ilara to stay back. A squad of Zareth guards rounded the corner, their black armor gleaming under the flickering lights. Jax didn't hesitate. He fired a series of precise shots, taking down 2 guards before they could react. Ilara stepped forward, her markings flaring as she extended a hand. The remaining guards froze mid-step, their weapons sparking as their systems malfunctioned. Jax stared at her, his brow furrowed. "You're getting better at that." "I'm learning," Ilara replied, her voice calm but strained. They continued through the station, moving swiftly and silently. As they approached the energy core, the corridors grew wider, lined with intricate machinery humming with power. The air was charged with energy, making Jax's skin prickle. "This is it," Ilara said, stopping in front of a massive, glowing chamber. The energy core pulsed with a blinding white light, surrounded by a network of conduits and control panels. Jax glanced around, his instincts on high alert. It's too quiet. Where's the security? As if on cue, a deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? Jax's stomach dropped. A tall figure emerged from the shadows. A Zereth commander clad in advanced combat armor, flanked by a squad of heavily armed drones. His helmet's visor glowed red, and his voice was cold and calculating. Step away from the core, the commander said, his weapon aimed directly at Ilara. You've caused enough trouble. Prototype. Ilara stepped forward, her glowing markings intensifying. I'm not going back with you. The commander tilted his head. You don't have a choice. Surrender now, or your friend dies. Jax raised his blaster, aiming it at the commander. You're making a big mistake, buddy. The commander smirked beneath his helmet. Am I? Before Jax could react, one of the drones fired, knocking the blaster from his hand. He grunted in pain, clutching his wrist as the commander stepped closer. You don't understand what you are, do you? The commander said, his gaze fixed on Ilara. You're not a savior. You're a weapon. And Zereth will ensure you fulfill your purpose. Ilara's markings flared brighter than ever, casting harsh shadows across the chamber. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. I'm more than what you made me. The energy core began to hum louder as Ilara reached out, her hands glowing with intense light. The machinery around her sparked and groaned, the conduits shuddering as she tapped into the station's systems. Stop her! The commander shouted, but it was too late. The drones fired, but their weapons fizzled out as Ilara's energy overloaded their circuits. The commander charged forward, his armored frame towering over her, but Jax tackled him from the side, knocking him off balance. Ilara, now's your chance, Jax shouted, struggling to hold the commander back. Ilara focused all her energy on the core, her glowing markings now almost blinding. The core's light pulsed erratically, the entire station trembling as alarms blared. You don't have to do this, the commander shouted, his voice desperate. You'll destroy yourself. Ilara looked at him, her eyes blazing. I'd rather destroy myself than let you use me. With a final surge of power, Ilara overloaded the core. A deafening explosion rocked the chamber as the energy surged outward, tearing through the facility. Jax was thrown backward, the force knocking the wind out of him. When the dust settled, the station was in ruins, its systems completely disabled. Jax stumbled to his feet, coughing as he looked for Ilara. She was on the ground, her glowing markings dim and flickering. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes barely open. Ilara. Jax rushed to her side, cradling her in his arms. You did it. You stopped them. She managed a weak smile. I told you, we could do it together. Jax's jaw tightened as he fought back the lump in his throat. Hang in there, kid. I'm not losing you. As the remains of the station drifted into the void, Jax carried Ilara back to the ship. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they had a chance to change everything.